All right, welcome to This Explainer. We've all absolutely been there, right? You're glued to the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, just completely avoiding that giant mountain of tasks you know you should be doing. We call it laziness. It's this incredibly universal human experience. Literally every single person on Earth has felt it at some point. But when we actually go looking for it in the formal, peer-reviewed halls of science, something super strange happens. The word just vanishes. So today we're going to unpack a really fascinating new bibliometric analysis from the Journal of Education and Social Sciences. We're tracking 40 years of data to figure out exactly how science deals with this super common, yet weirdly elusive, human behavior.
So I really want you to ponder this for a second. If laziness is something we all deal with, why won't scientists just study it directly? Why is this glaring blind spot in the scientific literature? I mean, you'd think psychologists would have this massive, highly standardized definition for why we occasionally just refuse to get off the couch. But as researchers Sahed Izzaruddin-Lubis and his team discovered, the scientific community essentially treats the word laziness like it's radioactive.
And this perfectly illustrates why. Laziness is what researchers actually call a folk concept. Basically, it's an idea that everyone gets in everyday life, but it hasn't ever been formally standardized in science. Why? Well, because it is just loaded with heavy, moralistic baggage. If a scientist calls a test subject lazy, it immediately sounds like a judgment, right? It sounds like a negative character flaw rather than, an objective observation. Because of all these negative connotations, scientists actively avoid the term. They literally have to study the behavior without ever actually saying the word itself. Okay, so let's dive into the secret language they use instead. When scientists actually want to study laziness, they rely on what are essentially scientific euphemisms, these really neutral terms like procrastination, amotivation, effort avoidance, or learned helplessness. It's kind of like a secret code. By searching for these specific synonyms alongside the actual word laziness, the researchers were finally able to uncover the hidden scientific history behind this behavior. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. Number 1, the word science avoids. Number 2, tracking 40 years of data. Number 3, global laziness research leaders. And number 4, a pathological shift. Let's start with section 1, the word science avoids. To isolate the psychology of, doing nothing, the researchers had to filter out a massive amount of digital noise. They started with over 13,000 records in the Scopus database. But here is the catch. The word lazy is actually used a ton in computer science. Terms like lazy loading, lazy evaluation, or lazy algorithms are huge in the tech world. So they had to meticulously clean their search queries to strip out all those technical terms and limit their scope strictly to the social sciences and psychology. They were hunting for the human element here, not software design. And the really crucial point is that after scrubbing all that unrelated data, spanning from 1985 all the way to 2025, they were left with a core, undeniable set of exactly 2,336 articles. That is, 40 years of carefully coded psychological studies, entirely about why we just can't bring ourselves to do the work.
All right, moving on to section 2, tracking 40 years of data.
Notice the massive escalation we're seeing in recent years. I mean, for decades, the numbers were relatively low and flat. But then, as we move into the modern era, the research just explodes. Look specifically at the 2021 to 2025 block, a staggering 804 articles, which makes up over 34% of all the studies they found. The researchers actually connect this massive recent spike directly to the COVID-19 pandemic. Think about it. It was a time when the entire world locked down, routines were completely shattered, and feelings of extreme laziness and lack of motivation became this highly relatable global reality. Suddenly, scientists urgently needed to figure out what the heck was happening to our collective drive. Which brings us to section 3, global laziness research leaders. So who are the prime suspects dedicating their lives to studying this? In this network web of global collaboration, if you look at the largest nodes, you can clearly see the United States is the absolute center of this research network, with 530 published papers over the 40 years. The lines connecting these countries represent how frequently researchers collaborate across borders. The US, the UK, and Spain form this really tight dominant triangle. Research on laziness is heavily localized in Western and particularly European contexts, with China actually being one of the only Asian countries making a significant mark on the map. But there is a fantastic twist here. The US might publish the most papers and collaborate the most, but when it comes to who is actually being cited the most, like who is truly influencing the field, the leaders are somewhere else entirely. Robert J. Valleran from Canada tops the list with an incredible 5,880 citations, followed really closely by Nikos Tamanis from Denmark. This tells us that the real individual brilliance in this specific niche is actually coming out of institutions in Canada and Northern Europe, and they're the ones guiding the worldwide understanding of the concept. So what exactly are these highly influential researchers writing about? Well, the single most cited article over this entire 40-year period is a 1992 study on the academic motivation scale, which has over 1,700 citations all by itself. This gives us a massive clue about how science has historically viewed laziness. For decades, it was seen almost entirely through the lens of school and learning. Laziness was basically synonymous with a failure of academic motivation. If you were lazy, well, it just meant you weren't trying hard enough in your studies. And that leads us to our final section, Section 4, a pathological shift. Historically, the most prominent keywords in this research space were terms like motivation, achievement goals, and self-determination theory. But as researchers dug into the most recent data, the brightly colored emerging topics you see mapped out today, they noticed some truly unexpected and, frankly, serious medical terms appearing with increasing frequency. This is a pretty incredible paradigm shift. On the one hand, we have the old view, laziness as a mere failure of self-regulation or, just academic amotivation. But then, look at the emerging view. Today, research on laziness is actively shifting towards pathology. The data shows it's now frequently associated with severe medical and psychiatric conditions. We're talking about depression, anhedonia, which is the inability to feel pleasure, and even psychosis. I actually want to read this direct quote from the analysis and just let it sink in for a moment. Increasingly, research on the concept of laziness is also sometimes associated with concepts such as basic psychological needs, depression, anhedonia, and psychosis. The authors of the study make a point to note that this frequent appearance is not just some random coincidence. It's a huge indication that the scientific community is finally waking up to the fact that what we casually brush off as laziness might actually be a deeply rooted pathological issue. It is a fundamental reevaluation of human behavior from the ground up. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question to chew on. Is laziness a moral feeling, or is it actually a medical symptom? The next time you find yourself stuck on the couch, just totally unable to muster the effort to move, you might want to give yourself a little grace. Because as 40 years of hidden scientific data is finally starting to prove, your lack of motivation might not be a flaw in your character at all. It might literally just be your biology asking for help. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it leaves you wanting to learn a little bit more about the hidden science driving our everyday lives.